What's up everyone, and welcome to this week's Cybersecurity Weekly, where we review the security events that happened in the last week. As always, I've broken them down in the timeline so you can jump around to any story you like. If you find my work valuable, of course, I ask you to hit the like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. Let's get started.
Oh, drat these computers. They're so naughty and so complex. I could pinch them.
We start off with phishing. Researchers from Kaspersky Lab have uncovered multiple spyware campaigns that target industrial firms to steal email account credentials and carry out fraudulent activities. Threat actors sent spear phishing messages from compromised corporate accounts to their contacts. The emails carry malicious attachments. The attackers were using off-the-shelf spyware, but in order to avoid detection, they limited the scope and lifetime of each sample to the bare minimum. These attacks were aimed at a very limited number of targets. They employed several spyware families such as Agent Tesla, Argent Logger, Hawkeye, Noon, Formbook, Mass Logger, Snake Key Logger, Azarolt, and LuckyBot. Kaspersky labeled these campaigns as anomalous due to their very short-lived nature, roughly 25 days. Attackers used to target less than 100 systems for each campaign. More than half are ICS, or Integrated Computer systems deployed in industrial environments. Unlike common spyware attacks, most of the samples employed in these campaigns were configured to use SMTP-based, rather than FTP or HTTPS, command and control servers as a one-way communication channel, a circumstance that suggests it was used only to exfiltrate data from infected systems. Kaspersky researchers speculate the stolen data is used by threat actors to go deeper in the compromised network and to target other organizations in order to collect more credentials. The attackers use corporate mailboxes compromised in previous attacks as the command and control servers for further attacks. Now, the experts have identified over 2,000 corporate email accounts belonging to industrial companies that were used as command and control servers for successive spyware campaigns. The number of stolen and sold corporate email accounts that were abused has been estimated to be greater than 7,000. Many of the email, RDP, SMTP, SSH, cPanel, and VPN account credentials siphoned from the attackers were made available on dark web marketplaces and sold to other threat actors. We now move on to patches. McAfee, now Trellix, has addressed a high-severity vulnerability tracked to CVE 2022-0166 that resides in McAfee Agent software for Windows. An attacker can exploit this flaw to escalate privileges and execute arbitrary code with system privileges. The McAfee Agent is the distributed component of McAfee ePolicy Orchestrator, or McAfee EPO. It downloads and enforces policies and executes client-side tasks such as deployment and updating. The agent also uploads events and provides additional data regarding each system's status. It must be installed on each system in your network that you wish to manage. The CVE 2022-0166 flaw was discovered by CERT/CC vulnerability analyst Will Dorman. The security firm addressed the vulnerability with the release of McAfee Agent 5.7.5 on January 18th. The issue affects agent versions prior to 5.7.5 and allows unprivileged attackers to run code using NT authority system account privileges. An unprivileged user can place a specially crafted OpenSSL.CNF in a location used by McAfee Agent to execute arbitrary code with system privileges on a Windows system running a vulnerable version of the agent software. The vulnerability is only exploitable locally. Anyway, experts warn that this issue could be changed with other issues to compromise the target system and elevate permissions to carry out additional malicious activities. McAfee also addressed a command injection vulnerability tracked to CVE 2021-31854 in Software Agent for Windows prior to 5.7.5. An attacker could exploit this vulnerability to inject arbitrary shell code into the cleanup.exe. Cisco has addressed a critical remote code execution vulnerability tracked to CVE 2022-20649 discovered in the Cisco Redundancy Configuration Manager, or RCM, for Cisco StarOS software. The flaw, discovered by the company experts during internal security testing, can be exploited by unauthenticated attackers to gain remote code execution, or RCE, with root-level privileges on vulnerable devices. The vulnerability exists due to the debug mode being incorrectly enabled for specific services. Cisco pointed out that an attacker would need to perform detailed reconnaissance to allow for unauthenticated access. The issue could be also exploited by an unauthenticated attacker. Cisco's Product Security Incident Response Team, or PSIRT, confirmed that the company is not aware of attacks in the wild exploiting this vulnerability. Cisco also addressed an information disclosure vulnerability tracked to CVE 2022-20648 in the Cisco RCM for Cisco StarOS. The flaw resides in a debug function for Cisco RCM for Cisco StarOS software. An unauthenticated remote attacker can exploit this issue to perform debug actions that could result in the disclosure of confidential information that should be restricted. Microsoft has released emergency out-of-band updates for Windows to address multiple issues caused by security updates issued as part of the January 2021 Patch Tuesday. The Windows Server updates for January were causing a series of issues for administrators. Multiple administrators reported anomalous reboots of Windows domain controllers and Hyper-V that was no longer starting on Windows servers. Reports also claim that the Windows Resilient File System, or REFS, volumes were no longer accessible after the installation of January 2021 updates. Some administrators and users reported problems with L2TP VPN connections on Windows 10 after installing the recent Windows 10 and Windows 11 cumulative updates. The OOB, or out-of-bounds updates, can be downloaded from the Microsoft Update Catalog if they are not installed directly from Windows Update as optional updates. The pre-release announcement for Critical Patch Updates, or CPU, for January 2022 confirms that Oracle security updates will address 483 new security updates. The Critical Patch Update for January will be released on Tuesday, January 18th, 2022. The CPU will address critical, which happened already. That's why it's a review. The CPU will address critical vulnerabilities in Oracle Essbase, Graph Server and Client, Secure Backup, Communications, Applications, Communications, Construction and Engineering, Enterprise Manager, Financial Services Applications, Fusion Middleware, Insurance Applications, PeopleSoft Support Tools, and Utilities Applications. Some of the vulnerabilities addressed in this critical patch update impacts multiple products. Oracle also urges its customers to apply critical patch update patches as soon as possible due to the risk of exploitation of the addressed vulnerabilities. The IT giant pointed out that many of these vulnerabilities can be exploited by remote attackers without authentication, meaning unauthenticated attackers. The highest CVSS version 3.1 base score, it was 10.0, was assigned to vulnerabilities affecting Oracle communications applications. The company will also address flaws in Oracle Essbase having a CVSS 3.1 base score of 9.9. High severity flaws will be fixed in Airlines Data Model, Big Data Graph, Communications Data Model, Commerce, Food and Beverage Applications, E-Business Suite, Golden Gate, Health Sciences Applications, Healthcare Applications, Hospitality Applications, Hyperion, iLearning, JD Edwards, MySQL, Policy Automation, Retail Applications, REST Data Services, Siebel CRM, Supply Chain Systems, Spatial Studio, and times 10 in memory. Zoho fixed a new critical severity flaw tracked to CVE 2021-44757 that affects its Desktop Central and Desktop Central MSP unified endpoint management solutions. The issue is an authentication bypass vulnerability. A remote attacker can exploit it to perform unauthorized attack actions in the server. The Zoho Manage Engine Desktop Central Endpoint Management Solution helps organizations in managing servers, laptops, desktops, smartphones, and tablets from a central location. The company recommends customers to follow the security hardening guidelines for Desktop Central and Desktop Central MSP to secure their systems or their installs. We now move on to attacks, vulnerabilities, and updates. The Dutch National Cybersecurity Centre warns organizations to remain vigilant on possible attacks exploiting the Log4j vulnerability. According to the Dutch agency, threat actors will continue to attempt to exploit the Log4Shell flaw in future attacks, as if we need them to tell us. The risk that cybercriminal groups and nation-state actors could exploit Log4j vulnerabilities in future attacks is still high. Recently, Microsoft posted a warning about a new campaign from a China-based actor it attacks as Dev0401 or tracks as Dev0401 to exploit the Log4Shell vulnerability in VMware Horizon systems exposed on the internet and deploy Night Sky ransomware. In the last weeks, Other ransomware gangs exploited the Log4 shell in their attacks. The Conti ransomware gang was the first group that exploited the CVE 2021-44228 flaw since mid-December. In the same period, Bitdefender researchers discovered that threat actors were attempting to exploit the Log4 shell vulnerability to deliver the new Consari ransomware on Windows machines. The NCSC will continue to share information through its website and GitHub repository. The latter contains operational information regarding the Log4 shell vulnerability in the Log4j logging library, especially CVE 2021-4428, CVE 2021-45046, and also covers CVE 2021-4104, also known as CVE 2021-45105. Researchers from Octagon Networks disclosed details of two critical security flaws in Control Web Panel that potentially expose Linux servers to remote code execution attacks. Control Web Panel is a popular open source Linux control panel for servers and VPS that allows easy management of web hosting environments. An attacker could chain the vulnerabilities to achieve pre-authentication remote code execution on vulnerable Linux servers. The first issue, tracked to CVE 2021-45467, is a file inclusion vulnerability that occurs when a web application is tricked into exposing or running arbitrary files on the web server. Experts focus their analysis on vulnerabilities that can be exploited by unauthenticated users or through zero-click attacks. In particular, they tested sections of the panel that are exposed without authentication in the web root, including /user/loader.php and /user/index.php. The expert Paulos Yebello from Octagon Networks discovered that several PHP functions, including the require and include functions, seem to process /.%00 as /./. Protections implemented in the application don't allow to switch to a parent directory using ... but they allow the PHP interpreter to accept a specially crafted string such as $00 that allows bypassing any restriction. Similarly, while STRI's STR ignores the null bytes, it still counts its size, so it bypasses the check. This means that it is possible to include any file on the server if an attacker finds a way to write to a file it can get pre-auth RCE. Despite Unix file read and write locking settings in CWP, an attacker can exploit the file inclusion bug to reach the restricted API section, which requires API key to access and is not exposed in the web root. Chaining this flaw with an arbitrary file rights vulnerability, such as CVE 2021-45466 flaw, an attacker can gain full remote code execution on the server. The expert found a way to exploit a file write bug in the API section that allowed him to write a .txt file, for example, using a maliciously added key. That will write to a file called authorized_keys located in the /resources/folder. Then, using the first file inclusion bug, the expert includes its malicious authorized_keys files to get full RCE. The CWT maintainers have already addressed the flaw with security updates released this month. Google Project Zero researchers Natalia Silvanovich disclosed details of two zero-day vulnerabilities in Zoom clients and multimedia router servers. An attacker could have exploited the now-fixed issues to crash the service, execute malicious code, and even leak the content of portions of the memory. The researcher focused its research for bugs in the Zoom client software, including zero-day issues that allowed her to take over the victim's system without requiring any user interaction. The two vulnerabilities have been fixed on November 24th, 2021. They are a buffer overflow information leakage issue tracked at CVE 2021-34423 and CVE 2021-34424, respectively. The CVE 2021-34423 vulnerability is a buffer overflow issue that received a CVSS score of 9.8. An attacker can trigger the vulnerability to execute arbitrary code or crash the service or application. The experts focused the analysis on the RTP, or real-time transport protocol, traffic used for audio and video communications. Silvanovich discovered that manipulating the contents of a buffer that supports reading different data types by sending a malformed chat message could trigger the flaw, causing the client and MMR server to crash. The CVE 2021-34424 is a process memory exposure flaw that received a CVSS score of 7.5. An attacker can trigger the flaw to potentially gain insight into arbitrary areas of the product's memory. The second flaw is caused by the lack of a null check that allows to leak data from the memory by joining a Zoom meeting via a web browser. The researcher pointed out that the lack of ASLR in Zoom MMR process exposed users to the risk of attacks. The good news is that Zoom has recently enabled it. Project Zero experts also pointed out that the closed nature of Zoom also heavily impacted the analysis. Unlike most video conferencing systems, Zoom uses a proprietary protocol that makes it hard to analyze. Kaspersky researchers spotted the China-linked App41 cyber espionage group using a UEFI implant dubbed MoonBounce to maintain persistence. At the end of 2021, researchers discovered a UEFI firmware-level compromise by analyzing logs from its firmware scanner. Threat actors compromised a single component within the firmware image to intercept the original execution flow of the machine's boot sequence and inject the sophisticated implant. UEFI implants like MoonBounce allow attackers to achieve persistence on the target system that is resilient to disk formatting or replacement. In the case of MoonBounce, the bootkit is implemented on the SPI flash memory of the motherboard. A UEFI bootkit implemented in the firmware could not be detected by antivirus software and any defense solution running on the operating system level. The purpose of the implant is to facilitate the deployment of user mode malware that stages execution of further payloads downloaded from the internet, reads the analysis published by Kaspersky. The infection chain itself does not leave any traces on the hard drive, as its components operate in memory only, thus facilitating a fileless attack with a small footprint. The attackers incorporated the UEFI implant into the core_DXE component of the firmware, aka the DXE Foundation, which is invoked early on at the DXE driver execution environment phase of the UEFI boot sequence. The infection leverages a set of hooks that intercept the execution of several functions in the EFI boot services table, namely allocate pool, create event X, and exit boot services. Attackers use these hooks to hijack the flow of these functions to malicious shellcode and append them to the core_DXE image, which in turn sets up additional hooks in the subsequent components of the boot sequence, like the Windows loader. The UEFI implant used by App41 is to deploy additional user mode malware used to execute further payloads downloaded from command and control server infrastructure. Kaspersky pointed out that the attack that investigated it is fileless. This means that it does not leave any traces on the hard drive, and its components only operate in memory. The researcher spotted other non-UEFI implants in the network targeted with the MoonBounce that were communicating with the same infrastructure that hosted the staging payload. The researchers explained that the MoonBounce UEFI bootkit was employed in a very targeted attack. The sophisticated malware was detected in a single case. Bank Indonesia confirmed that it was the victim of a ransomware attack that took place last month. The Conti ransomware gang claimed the attack and leaked some allegedly stolen files as proof of the security breach. A bank spokesperson told Reuters that the ransomware attack did not impact services. We were attacked, but so far so good, as we took anticipatory measures, and most importantly, public services at Bank Indonesia were not disrupted at all, the spokesperson Erwin Haryono told Reuters. According to CNN Indonesia, a spokesman for Indonesia's cyber agency, or BSSN, said no critical data was leaked and the attacks occurred in a Bank Indonesia office on Sumatra Island. Conti operators have added Bank Indonesia to the list of victims on their Tor leak site. The gang claims to have stolen 13.88 gigabytes worth of files. The FBI officially linked the Diavol ransomware operation to the infamous TrickBot gang, the group that is behind the TrickBot banking Trojan. TrickBot is a popular banking Trojan that has been around since October 2016. Its authors have continuously upgraded it by implementing new features. Operators continue to offer the botnet through a multi-purpose malware-as-a-service model. Threat actors leverage the botnet to distribute a broad range of malware, including InfoStealer and ransomware such as Conti and Ryuk. To date, the TrickBot botnet has already infected more than 1 million computers. The TrickBot gang is also behind the development of the Bazaar backdoor and Anchor backdoors. In July, researchers from Fortinet first spotted the new ransomware family, tracked as Diavol, and speculated it might have been developed by Wizard Spider, the cybercrime gang behind the TrickBot botnet. Fortinet experts noticed similarities between Diavol and Conti threads, but unlike Conti, Diavol doesn't avoid infecting Russian victims. In August, IBM X-Force researchers conducted a new analysis of an old variant of the threat that, unlike the one analyzed by Fortinet experts, appears to be a development version used for testing purposes. The comparison of the two versions allowed the researchers to get insight into the development process of Diavol and of future versions of the malware. The analysis conducted by IBM X-Force researchers reinforced the link between Diavol ransomware and the TrickBot malware. Now, the FBI's report provides technical details about the Diavol ransomware and its link to TrickBot gain. Crypto.com is a cryptocurrency exchange app based in Singapore. The app currently has 10 million users and 3,000 employees. Recently, several Crypto.com users reported suspicious transactions that stole thousands of dollars in Ethereum despite their accounts being protected with two-factor authentication. The company initially confirmed the unauthorized access to wallets belonging to a small number of users. The company reassured its users, saying that all funds are safe. Now the company CEO Chris Marzalek has confirmed during an interview with Bloomberg Live that 483 customer accounts were compromised and that threat actors stole $33 million worth of cryptocurrency. Initial news about the security breach reported the theft of 4,830 Ethereum, or roughly $15 million, but according to Ergo BTC, an analyst at Bitcoin research firm OXT Research, the attackers may have stolen around $33 million. Ergo BTC also discovered another wallet containing 172.9 bitcoins, or $7 million, that belongs to the threat actors behind the Crypto.com security breach. The threat actors may also have stolen 444 bitcoin, or $18.4 million, from the exchange's custodial wallet. Experts also reported that the threat actors have already laundered 271 bitcoin via a Bitcoin Tumblr service that was often used by North Korea-linked app groups. The impacted accounts were restored at the time of this writing. The company also revoked all customer two-factor authentication tokens and announced to have implemented additional security measures to protect its platform. Crypto.com announced the introduction of the Worldwide Account Protection Program, or WAPP, that aims at protecting user funds in cases where threat actors will gain unauthorized access to their accounts and withdraw funds without the user's permission. WAPP will cover losses up to $250,000 for qualified users, so it's similar to what a bank would cover. A cyber attack on a Red Cross contractor resulted in the theft of personal data from more than 515,000 highly vulnerable people seeking missing families. The infamous attack was disclosed by the International Committee of the Red Cross, or ICRC, which confirmed that the data originated from at least 60 different Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies worldwide. Stolen data included information belonging to individuals separated from their families due to conflict, migration, and disaster, missing persons and their families, and people in detention. An attack on the data of people who are missing makes the anguish and suffering for families even more difficult to endure. We are all appalled and perplexed that this humanitarian information would be targeted and compromised, said Robert Mardini, ICRC's Director General. This cyber attack puts vulnerable people, those already in need of humanitarian services, at further risk. The contractor targeted by the attackers is an external company in Switzerland that stores data for the organization. This time, the organization has yet to discover who was behind the attack and the motivation. It has no indication that the compromised information has been leaked. ICRC shut down the systems and website for the Restoring Family Links program that was hit by the attackers until they could kind of assess the damage. Bitdefender discovered a new evasive cryptocurrency stealer dubbed BHUNT that is able to exfiltrate Wallet, Exodus, Electrum, Atomic, Jax, Ethereum, Bitcoin, Litecoin wallets, contents, passwords stored in the browser, and data from the clipboard. BHUNT is a modular stealer written in .NET. Its binary files are heavily encrypted with commercial packers such as Themida and VMProtect. The samples identified by the experts are digitally signed with a digital certificate issued by a software company, but Bitdefender pointed out that the digital certificate does not match the binaries. The samples, analyzed by Bitdefender, uses encrypted configuration scripts that are downloaded from public pastebin pages, according to the experts. The malware spreads via cracked software installers and affected users in multiple countries, including Australia, Egypt, Germany, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Norway, Singapore, South Africa, Spain, and the US. The attack chain starts with the execution of an initial dropper, which writes to disk heavily encrypted binaries that are then used to launch the main component of BHUNT. The samples identified appear to have been digitally signed with a digital certificate issued to a software company, but the digital certificates does not match the binaries. The cryptocurrency stealer has a modular structure. Some of the modules analyzed by the researchers are Blackjack Stealer wallet files, Chaos Crew establish persistent and download additional payloads, Golden 7, steal account tokens from Firefox and Chrome, as well as passwords from Clipboard, Sweet Bonanza, it steals stored passwords from supported browsers like Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, Opera, and Safari, and Mr. Proper deletes artifacts from infected systems. BHUNT Stealer exfiltrates information about cryptocurrency wallets and passwords, hoping for financial gain, concludes the report that also includes indicators of compromise. Its code is straightforward, and the delivery method is similar to that of existing successful malware, like Redline Stealer. Never install applications from untrusted sources. Keep your security solution up to date and never turn it off, especially if it blocks the installation of such software. SolarWinds has addressed a vulnerability in Serv-U products that threat actors are actively exploited in the wild. The company pointed out that all the attack attempts failed. The vulnerability tracked as CVE 2021-35247 was discovered by Microsoft security researcher Jonathan Barr-Orr while monitoring attacks exploiting the vulnerabilities in the Log4j library. The flaw is an input validation vulnerability that could allow threat actors to build a query given some input and send that query over the network without sanitation. According to the advisory published by SolarWinds, the Serv-U web login screen to LDAP authentication was allowing characters that were not sufficiently sanitized. SolarWinds released Serv-U 15.3 that addresses the vulnerability by performing additional validation and sanitation. The vendor pointed out that no downstream effect has been detected as the LDAP servers ignored improper characters. In the past, other threat actors exploited Serv-U vulnerabilities to carry out malicious activities. In November, Clop Ransomware Gang, aka TA505 or Fin11, was spotted exploiting CVE 2021-35211 SolarWinds Serv-U vulnerability to breach businesses' infrastructure and deploy its ransomware. In July 2021, Microsoft reported that a recent attack against SolarWinds file transfer servers were carried out by a Chinese hacking group tracked as Dev0322. In July, SolarWinds addressed a zero-day remote code execution flaw, CVE 2021-35211, in Serv-U products, which was actively exploited in the wild by a single threat actor. SolarWinds was informed of the zero-day by Microsoft. The issue affects Serv-U managed file transfer server and Serv-U secured FTP. According to Microsoft, the flaw was exploited in attacks against a limited, targeted set of customers by a single threat actor. Researchers from OnLab Security Emergency Response Center, or ASEC, spotted an IRC bot written in Golang that is being used to carry out distributed denial of service attacks targeting users in Korea. VXers use Golang because it is easy and allows the development of cross-platform malicious codes. The distributed denial of service IRC bot strains are disguised as adult games and are being installed via platforms commonly used for the distribution of malware in Korea, so-called webHards. WebHards were also used in past campaigns to distribute NJRAT and UDP-RAT. The attack chain starts with threat actors uploading malware disguised as an adult game to the webHard. Attackers use different games containing the same malware. The malicious code is hosted on a webHard drive or a remote file hosting service in the form of compressed zip archives. Upon executing the executable game-opened.exe, in the archive the malware is executed while the actual game is launched. This downloader connects to a remote command and control server to retrieve additional payloads, including an IRC bot that can perform DDoS attacks. Once executed, the Golang DDoS IRC bot connects to a particular IRC server and enters the attacker's command in order to receive commands, including one that can instruct the bot to perform DDoS attacks. A vulnerability in the implementation of multi-factor authentication for Box allowed attackers to take over accounts without having access to the victim's phone, Varonis researchers reported. Box develops and markets cloud-based content management, collaboration, and file sharing tools for businesses. The platform supports two-factor authentication based on an authenticator application in SMSs. Varonis Threat Labs researchers disclosed the vulnerability via HackerOne, and the company fixed it in November 2021. Upon attempting to log into a Box account, the platform sets a session cookie and redirects the user to a form where they need to provide the time-based one-time password, or TOTP, generated with an authenticator app like MFA verification, or a code received via SMS like two-factor authentication verification. The researchers pointed out that if the user does not navigate to the SMS verification form, no SMS message will be sent despite the session cookie having been generated. A threat actor can provide the user's email and password to get a valid session cookie, bypassing SMS-based two-factor authentication. An attacker can easily obtain login credentials for a targeted user from past data breaches or through phishing attacks. When the user adds an authentication app, the eBox platform assigns a factor ID, and at login, they are required to provide the one-time password generated by the app along with the credentials. The experts devised a method to bypass multi-factor authentication for accounts where SMS-based MFA is enabled by abandoning the SMS-based verification process and initiating TOTP-based MFA instead, technically mixing the MFA modes. The attacker could access the victim's account using the correct username and password, but providing a factor ID and code from a Box account and authenticator app associated with an account under his control. A new ransomware gang called White Rabbit launched its operations, and according to the experts, it is likely linked to the Fin8 financially motivated group. In December, the popular malware researcher Michael Gillespie first mentioned the group and called to action the experts to hunt the new threat. The first public analysis of the White Rabbit ransomware was published by Trend Micro following an investigation into an attack on a U.S. bank that took place in December 2021. The ransomware required a password to execute the malicious payload, a technique that was used previously by other malware, including the eGregor ransomware. The White Rabbit's payload is a small file of around 100 kilobytes with no notable strings and seemingly no activity. The ransomware drops a note for each file it encrypts. Each note bears the name of the encrypted file and is appended with .script.txt. The ransomware targets files in fixed, removable, and network drives, as well as resources. It skips some paths and directories to avoid crashing the system and destroying its own notes. The researchers also gathered evidence of the use of Cobalt Strike commands to drop the malicious payload into the affected system. The link between the White Rabbit ransomware operation with Fin8 operations is based on the use of the same malicious URL and a never-before-seen version of Bad Hatch, which is a Fin8 backdoor used by the group to infect POS systems and steal payment card data. The White Rabbit ransomware operators use double extortion and threaten victims to release their stolen data if they don't pay the ransom. Moncler confirmed a data breach after an attack that took place in December. The luxury fashion giant was hit by AlphV, or BlackCat ransomware, that today published the stolen data on its leak site in the Tor network. In December, malware researchers from Recorded Future and Malware Hunter team discovered AlphV, or aka BlackCat, the first professional ransomware strain that was written in the Rust programming language. BlackCat can target Windows, Linux, and VMware ESXi systems, but at this time the number of victims is limited. The popular malware researcher Michael Gillespie said that the BlackCat ransomware is very sophisticated. Very sophisticated. Recorded Future experts speculate that the author of the BlackCat ransomware, known as AlphV, was previously involved in the Revil ransomware operations. AlphV has been advertising the BlackCat ransomware as a service on the cybercrime forums XSS and exploit since early December. Like other ransomware groups, the gang also implements a double extortion model, threatening to leak the stolen data if the victims don't pay. AlphV is attempting to recruit affiliates for its operations, offering them between 80 and 90% of the final ransom, depending on its value. The BlackCat operators only hit a small number of victims at this time in the US, Australia, and India. Ransom demands range from a few hundred to thousands up to $3 million worth of Bitcoin or Monero. The gang hit Moncler in December. At the time, the company only confirmed that it had suffered a malware attack that caused a temporary outage. The BlackCat gang published the data because Moncler refused to pay a $3 million ransom. The data published by ransomware gang on the leak site includes employees, former employees, suppliers, consultants, business partners, and customer information, earnings statements, spreadsheets, invoices, email archive files, and other documents. No financial data was exposed as a result of the attack because the company doesn't store on its servers such kind of information. Trend Micro researchers spotted an elusive threat actor called Earth Lusca that targets organizations worldwide via spear phishing and watering hole attacks. According to the security firm, the group is financially motivated. Its cyber espionage campaign hit high-value targets such as government and education institutions, religious movements, pro-democracy and human rights organizations in Hong Kong, COVID-19 research organizations, gambling and cryptocurrency companies, and the media. Trend Micro researchers speculate the group operates under the China-linked WinT umbrella. The WinT group was first spotted by Kaspersky in 2013, but according to the researchers, the gang has been active since 2007. The experts believe that under the WinT umbrella, there are several app groups, including WinT Greph, Playful Dragon, App17, Deputy Dog, Axiom, Barium, LED, PES-CV, Wicked Panda, Group 72, Blackfly, and App41, and ShadowPad. The app group targeted organizations in various industries, including the aviation, gaming, pharmaceuticals, technology, telecoms, and software development industries. The researchers grouped the Earth Lusca's infrastructure into two clusters. The first cluster was set up using rented virtual private servers. It was employed in watering hole and spear phishing attacks. The second cluster is composed of compromised servers running vulnerable versions of Oracle Glassfish server. The second cluster was used to perform scanning for vulnerabilities in public-facing servers and builds traffic tunnels within the target's network. Both clusters served as command and control servers. The threat actors were observed deploying Cobalt Strike in the infected networks, along with a set of additional malware and web shells. The group also used other tools, such as cryptocurrency miners, as part of its operations. In one of the attacks analyzed by the researchers, the threat actors injected a malicious script into the compromised HR system of a target organization. This script shows a social engineering message, such as a flash update pop-up or a DNS error, and attempts to trick the victim into downloading a malicious file that deploys a Cobalt Strike loader. An international operation conducted by law enforcement bodies from 10 countries took down VPNLab.net, a VPN service provider that is very popular in the cybercrime ecosystem. This week, law enforcement authorities took action against the criminal misuse of VPN services as they targeted the users and infrastructure of VPNLab.net. The VPN provider services which aimed to offer shielded communications and internet access, were being used to support or in support of serious criminal acts such as ransomware deployment and other cybercrime activities, reads the announcement published by the Europol that coordinated the operation. The authorities seized 15 VPNLabs.net or VPNLab.net servers across 10 countries. VPNLab was launched in 2008 and was offering online anonymity to criminal organizations. Its technology was based on OpenVPN and adopted 2048-bit encryption. The price for the subscription was very low, just $60 a year. VPNLab operators were advertising their platform on several hacking forums and dark web forums. The service was used by ransomware gangs for their operations. The investigation started after an attack carried out by Riot ransomware operators hit a German city in August 2019, and according to law enforcement, threat actors used VPNLab domains. The authorities have obtained customer data stored on seized servers and confirmed that the investigation is still ongoing. Recently, other VPN services were targeted by operations from law enforcement in recent years. In December 2020, a joint operation conducted by European enforcement agencies resulted in the seizure of the infrastructure of 3 bulletproof VPN services. We now move on to other security news. The Russian government said that last week it arrested 14 people accused of working for Revil, or R-Evil, a particularly aggressive ransomware group that has extorted hundreds of millions of dollars from victim organizations. The Russian Federal Security Services, or FSB, said the actions were taken in response to a request from the U.S. officials, but many experts believe the crackdown is part of an effort to reduce tensions over Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision to station 100,000 troops along the nation's border with the Ukraine. The FSB said it arrested 14 R-Evil ransomware members and searched more than 24 addresses in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Leningrad, and Lipetsk. As part of the raids, the FSB seized more than $600,000 US, 426 million rubles, or $5.5 million, 500,000 euros, and 20 premium cars purchased with funds obtained from cybercrime. The FSB did not release the names of any of the individuals arrested, although a report from the Russian news agency TASS mentions 2 defendants, Roman Gennadievich Muromsky and Andrei Sergeyevich Bezonov. Russian media outlet RIA Novosti released video footage from some of the raids. It is clear that U.S. authorities have known for some time the real names of our evil's top captains and moneymakers. Last fall, President Biden told Putin that he expects Russia to act when the United States shares information on specific Russians involved in ransomware activity. So why now? Russia has amassed approximately 100,000 troops along its southern border with Ukraine, and diplomatic efforts to defuse the situation have reportedly broken down. The Washington Post and other media outlets today reported that the Biden administration has accused Moscow of sending saboteurs into eastern Ukraine to stage an incident that could give Putin a pretext for ordering an invasion. Dmitry Alperovich, co-founder of and former chief technology officer for the security firm CrowdStrike, called the our evil arrest in Russia ransomware diplomacy. The U.S. Treasury Department this week announced sanctions against 4 current and former Ukrainian government officials for having supported influence activities carried out by the Russian government. The officials are accused of having gathered sensitive information about critical infrastructure in the Ukraine. According to the U.S. agency, Russian Security Service, the Federal Security Service, FSB, recruited Ukrainian citizens in key positions to destabilize the political and social country. The 4 individuals were involved in the influence campaign with different roles. The suspects have supported threat actors in carrying out an influence campaign. 2 of the 4 individuals, Taras Kozak and Oleh Voloshin, who are 2 current Ukrainian members of parliament from the party led by Viktor Medvedchuk, supported Russian disinformation by amplifying false narratives and undermining Ukrainian sovereignty. Kozak controls several news channels in Ukraine and is accused of having supported the Russian intelligence to denigrate senior members of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's inner circle, accusing them of mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic. Voloshin has worked with Russian-linked actors to undermine Ukrainian government officials and advocate on behalf of Russia. Vladimir Zivkovich, former deputy secretary of the Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council, supported Russian intelligence carrying out influence operations to support the decision for Ukraine to officially cede Crimea to Russia in exchange for a drawdown of Russian-backed forces in Donbass. Volodymyr Oleynik is a former Ukrainian official who currently resides in Moscow. He shares Russia's anti-Western sentiments, and in 2021, he worked for the FSB to gather information about Ukrainian critical infrastructure. The U.S. agency ordered to block all property interests and property of the designated individuals described above that are in the United States or in possession of the control of the United States persons. Any entities that are owned directly or indirectly, 50% or more by one or more blocked persons are also blocked. The U.S. Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, published an insights document that warned organizations about potential critical threats following the recent cyber attacks aimed at the Ukraine. The document starts from most recent attacks targeting public and private entities in Ukraine, including website defacement and destructive malware-based attacks on local systems that could have severe impact on critical functions. Microsoft spotted a destructive malware tracked as WhisperGate that targeted government, nonprofit, and IT entities in the Ukraine with a wiper disguised as ransomware. The attackers were discovered by Microsoft on January 13th. The experts attributed the attack to an emerging threat cluster tracked as Dev0586. The experts pointed out that the operation has not overlapped with TTPs associated with past campaigns. MSTIC assesses that the malware, which is designed to look like ransomware but lacking a ransom recovery mechanism, is intended to be destructive and designed to render targeted devices inoperable rather than to obtain a ransom, reads the post published by Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center. At present, and based on Microsoft visibility, our investigation teams have identified the malware on dozens of impacted systems, and that number could grow as our investigation continues. However, Reuters, in an exclusive, reported that the attacks were launched by the Belarus-linked app group tracked as UNC1151, aka Ghostwriter. The CISA document provides recommendations to reduce the likelihood of a damaging cyber intrusion and increase the resilience of the infrastructure. According to Symantec, WhisperGate Wiper may have been employed in attacks against unknown victims since at least October 2021. In recent attacks against the Ukraine, threat actors compromised Ukrainian government networks through a supply chain attack that involved the third-party software supplier Kitsoft. According to Ukrainian cybersecurity agencies, threat actors exploited a vulnerability in October CMS tracked as CVE 2021-342648 and the Log4 shell vulnerability CVE 2021-35648. Actually, this should be 442 44228, government authorities also reported distributed denial of service attacks against their infrastructure. Below are the recommendations provided by the CSA in the Insights document. Validate that all remote access to the organization's network are privileged or administrative access requires multi-factor authentication. Ensure that software is up to date, prioritizing updates that address known exploited vulnerabilities identified by CISA. Confirm that the organization's IT personnel have disabled all ports and protocols that are not essential for business purposes. If the organization is using cloud services, ensure that IT personnel have reviewed and implemented strong controls outlined in CISA's guidance. Sign up for CISA's free cyber hygiene services, including vulnerability scanning, to help reduce exposure to threats. The UK's National Cybersecurity Centre has published new guidance for organizations for combating telephone and SMS fraud. This guide aims at protecting their customers from fraudulent activities while also ensuring that their SMS and telephone messages are consistent and trustworthy. The adoption of such practices will make it harder for criminals to exploit telecoms channels to target their customers. The UK agency recommends creating trustworthy content that meets the standards expected for communications. Poor formatting, spelling mistakes, and other inconsistencies lead to the receivers into thinking that they are facing fake messaging. Some recommendations provided by the agency were when creating content: don't ask for personal details, don't include web links if possible. Where it is absolutely necessary to include web links, make sure they are human readable and easy to remember. Consistency is important across all channels. Avoid language that induces panic or implies urgency. When communicating via SMS, the NSCS recommends using a 5-digit number instead of a regular phone number. Use a sender ID that appears in place of the sending number, indicating that the sender is trustworthy. Use the same sender ID consistently across all communications and register it with the MEF. Try not to include web links in SMS, but if it's absolutely necessary, do not use URL shortening services and obscure the domain. Use as few SMS distribution providers as possible and audit all messages to validate the content. One significant recommendation coming from the UK NCS is confirm that the routing does not go offshore. Many fraudulent calls originate outside, in this case the UK. Routing legitimate calls outside the UK and back for a cost saving makes it harder to protect your customer. Now this could ultimately end up being the end for offshore call centers globally, if this becomes more of a global recommendation from many countries like the US, Germany, etc. If it's bad to route calls offshore and then back, like India, Pakistan, etc., then those companies can definitely be out of business. With that, I say thanks again for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe if you haven't already, and smash the bell if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next episode. Take care.